I'm Case's dad, and welcome to our shop. We're in Atlanta, Georgia, and this is where Case learned to wrench with tools. What I'd like to show you today is this 1984 Honda Goldwing. Problem is, I finished the bike yesterday, I took it for a test ride, and I blew up the lithium-ion battery. It caught on fire. Fortunately, the bike did not burn down. So there's a lesson to be learned from that. If you're going to go to lithium-ion, replace your rectifier. So I've got a new rectifier here. I'm going to install it on the bike, and we'll do another video featuring this bike. So I've got another motorcycle I'm going to show you in the meantime. Alright, so the motorcycle that I'd like to show you is a 1982 Yamaha Virago. It's this bike over here. The Virago is probably one of the ugliest motorcycles ever made. But what makes this a great project motorcycle is that it doesn't have a frame. It's very unusual. Most motorcycles have a frame. This bike does not. What you have is the motor and a backbone, which is bolted to each head of the V-twin motor and comes back, and your rear swing arm is connected to your crankcase and this backbone. So it's a wide open canvas, and there's a lot you can do with this. So you can take an ugly bike like this, buy it cheap, and turn it into what I think is a pretty nice looking bike. So in terms of aesthetics, there's a lot to work with here. The tank is off of Case's 1975 Honda CB750, an iconic bike. He wanted to build a cafe racer, so I was able to fit this bike on this frame. Gave it a nice look. It's still a vintage looking tank, but has beautiful lines. Decided to go with kind of a cafe theme, so I named this bike Cafe Espresso. If you look at the wheels, you can see cafe painted on the rim of the wheel. The name Espresso. Have the brown kind of coffee color here with tan milk looking colors here, and that just makes for a very pretty looking bike. The fenders I steamed wood and did dark inlay, again with the kind of a brownish coffee look. Also the rear fender was steamed and curved. So continuing with the aesthetics of the bike, I changed the front end. This front end is from a Yamaha R6. I think it was a 2008 R6. What's nice about this front end, it has the inverted fork design. So typically you have a very skinny fork up here and then the fatter portion down below. So this is a more modern front end. All of the controls are also from the 2008 Yamaha R6. Coming back here, here's the battery box. Made this out of copper sheet. Punched this hole in. Did some bead rolling here, and then the rest of the box is wood. The rear shock is also off of a R6 Yamaha. Now this bike originally is a monoshock design, so I was able to bolt that, with some modifications, bolt that shock in place. So I think aesthetically the bike has a nice presentation. These bikes originally had what's called a Bendix starter design. It uses a big Bendix spring, and when you hit the start button, the starter motor begins to spin, and a gear is thrown out, engages the flywheel. It's a pretty violent mechanical process, and over time those parts wear out. So the Bendix design is not great. The 920 can be converted to what is called a solenoid starter. So originally when I finished this build, it still had the Bendix design, and it makes a horrible sound. It doesn't work reliably. So I was able to find the parts for the solenoid starter that would fit this crankcase. So I pulled this off, replaced this part, and now I have a solenoid style starter, which works much better. If you buy a VX750, it will not fit. So it's important that you get either the 920 or a model that is later than 1984. I think that's an extremely important thing. When I replaced this cover and starter setup, the stator is a different size, and instead of taking the stator off the old cover and taking this one off and replacing it, I decided to take the mechanicals off of this motor and replace it with the ones that came with this cover. In doing that, I lost the timing between the top end, the cam right here, and the crankshaft here. So we had to retime the motor, and after riding it a few times, a bolt came loose. It wasn't properly torqued down. And this is the gear that sits behind this cover that turns the cam. Because this bolt holding this gear to the cam came loose, the pin that keeps it aligned slipped, and so the motor is running, the cam stopped turning. This is an interference motor, so one of the valves doesn't retract up, the piston comes up, hit it, bent it, destroyed the back end of the motor. So that's a big deal. If you make this change, which I highly recommend you do, take all the internals out of the cover and replace them with the old ones rather than taking the stator off. Alright, so once I ruined the back of the motor, I found a replacement rear cylinder on eBay, a couple $100. Had to pull the motor out, replace it, retime the motor, and put it all back together. Now she runs beautifully. So that's a great way to go. Get the 920 if you're going to do a project like this. Here you see the rectifier, which is the original one, still works fine. Another modification that I made to this bike is the original bike has a dual carburetor setup, and I had a lot of problems with the carburetor. So I found a company that makes a single carb setup. So now it has a manifold splits to the two cylinders here, and you would think a single carburetor wouldn't be as fast or as good as double, but actually you get a ton of low-end torque with this carb. It's a big carb, and it works extremely well. So that's a great upgrade. As part of the aesthetics on this bike, I did all copper tubing, again trying to stay with the cafe espresso theme of the bike, and I think that gives it a nice, simple, clean look. Up here on the handlebars, I installed a GPS speedometer. You can go online, and if you Google stuff like that, you can find people that make speedos like that. You can customize the speedo depending on what you want the look to be. I went with a brown background, white lettering. I thought that would go well with the look of the bike. All the controls are still off the R6, so the wiring harness is all custom, but it's pretty simple to wire up one of these bikes. So why don't I crank her up, and we'll take her up and down the driveway and give you a chance to see how she sounds.